Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with a discussion of the 31 days of gangster films and cop films from the year 1970 to the present. And I understand and I admit that this may seem like a wide expanse of years, but also it is my hope that this can also afford us, you and I, with the opportunity to talk about as many films as possible over the course of these 31 days in the context of these genres respectively. And my goodness, what exciting and entertaining genres of cinema these are. So in that spirit, I'd like to focus today, specifically this video, on the gangster film element. And for that, I have selected a film which I think can be described as a part of or an example of the gangster film genre. Although perhaps I think there's also at the same time room for discussion, especially in the context of the main character, and I'll get to that momentarily. And depending on how one views the main character's trajectory, his plans, his ambitions in the context of this particular film and the story, maybe one can describe him as being a career criminal or gangster, or maybe he is trying to reform himself, trying to quote-unquote better his ways, trying to find an alternative life or route or lifestyle beyond his earlier criminal-based activities from earlier in his life, etc. So in that way, perhaps there is room to discuss whether or not this is a film that indeed falls within the gangster film genre if we were to set up a certain level of parameters to define examples of the genre. However, at the same time, I think based on the story, based on the background details, based on certain secondary characters, subplots, other character arcs and the like, I think we can also say that no matter where one finds oneself in the discussion of the main character, we can still see gangster film elements or crime film elements that are rooted in the context of this film, in the way in which this is plotted, and the various, say, subplots that arise and the obstacles that confront our main character as he is trying to reach a particular objective or goal, or dare I say it, a type of paradise. And I think in those ways we have a very rewarding work indeed, also very cool due to a lot of elements, and I think that has to do in large part to the way it is presented and directed. I'm speaking about a film which is from or it's described as being from 1993, and this is from the director Brian De Palma. And it has in its really interesting cast people like John Leguizamo and Penelope Ann Miller and Sean Penn. And it has front and center as its starring as the main character, Al Pacino. And I'm referring to this work, which is Carlito's Way. Carlito's Way is a very stylish and very absorbing drama. It is also a crime thriller. It has at its heart and center this character, the Al Pacino character Carlito Brigante, and we find him at the very start of this film in this period of the 1970s, and we have his efforts at trying to escape from his crime past or his criminal roots, in terms of what he has done in his earlier years of his life. And we also find him being released from a prison sentence early due to a type of procedural technicality issue. And so his lawyer, and who is also his friend, who is the Dave Kleinfeld character, who's portrayed by Sean Penn, who's also a very fascinating character in and of itself. We find that Carlito, the Al Pacino character, is now free. And with his freedom, he decides that he wants to make certain choices with his life. As I say, he wants to maybe either escape or retire or otherwise go somewhere else. And throughout this film, we see him attempting to do so, attempting to essentially escape let me say, past life of crimes with regard to his relationship with the sort of the underworld and drugs and the like. And so, but unfortunately for him, we find that there are elements, there are characters, there are specters or ghosts of the past and or the present that are coming back to haunt him, to confront him, and maybe to stop him at any cost from achieving his goal of finding his place or his paradise, as it were. And so, with this particular set of story or circumstance, we then follow Carlito, the Al Pacino character, as he tries to go from situation to situation, maneuver himself from place to place, and trying to prepare for his trip to paradise, as it were, both metaphorical and also actual. However, as he's trying to maneuver and make arrangements and make situations, he is confronted by certain setbacks that make him exposed to the life of crime that was part of him, part of his earlier days, as it were, that the life that he is essentially trying to escape, but is always bringing him back through certain external circumstances that are beyond his control, or maybe certain other instances where he is trying to, in a sense, adapt to these changing circumstances, this new world, as it were. Now, one of the things that I think makes this very fascinating discussion in the context of the gangster film genre is whether or not one can consider the main character of Carlito as a gangster or criminal, or whether when at the time that we meet him and find him in the film, maybe as he is trying, as I say, as it's obvious from the very outset of the film, as he's trying to quote unquote retire and leave behind his past criminal life in favor of a new life in a new paradise with everything that is maybe promised or offered or maybe possible, especially when he considers his life or the possibility with the Penelope Ann Miller character, the Gale character, Gale, and the life that could be possible with her. And similar situations like that. So in that discussion or in that consideration, one can consider whether or not this is indeed a gangster film, or whether it is indeed maybe more finding its footing more in, say, a human drama film. However, I think also we can consider it a gangster film because there are those elements, as I say, there are the elements of corruption and also crime and also gangster or the mafia or the mob, and those I think find a direct presence in, say, some of the secondary plot aspects of the film. For example, the Dave Kleinfeld lawyer character and the various, say, meddlings and messes and troubles that he has or that have accumulated, and when we find him in the film, he is actually up to his neck in a lot of mess and trouble and other sorts of dire straight situations indeed, which have to do with his connections with the criminal underworld. And so in that way, we can say that this is a gangster film in that sense. And we have Carlito trying to maneuver and trying to adapt to such situations while still maintaining a sense of loyalty to his friends and to people who have helped him throughout his life, and also a sense of a moral, grounded center of his own character and his own, say, perspective and philosophy. So therefore, we have this type of struggle and struggle of our main character trying to deal with all these elements, these exterior elements that seem to be trying to push him back or trying to prevent him from achieving this sense of paradise, but instead lure him back or bring him back or force him back into his criminal ways. And in that forcing back. We do see him confronting various scenarios involving very violent confrontations, maybe deals gone wrong, etc. And he seems to be a victim of random happenstance and circumstance. But even so, he is trying his best to make out of the situation with his life, and also scot-free. So as I say, he can hopefully continue on with his attempt at achieving paradise. But as I say, there are many elements, many characters, many things, many obstacles that emerge that might or might not prevent him from ultimately achieving his goal. Will he achieve it or not? That is the question that sustains the sense of tension and suspense throughout the film. This is a crime film. It is also a film about the attempts at trying to reach a type of redemption or salvation, while trying also to maneuver oneself in this world that is both having to do with corruption and crime, and also the underworld, and also trying to make sense of this world as best as one can. Even where law enforcement is concerned, maybe those elements of law enforcement too might have a hint, or maybe something more than just a subtle hint of corruption, even on that side of the law. So for all these and other reasons, I think we can call this a really wonderful, entertaining, eclectic mix of gangster crime elements with a fascinating character at the heart and center of this film. That is the Al Pacino character of Carlito. And so it's a really, really great, compelling work indeed. And the way that he is able to adapt to the situations, that's part of the reason why we follow him and we are rooting for him. And especially when we see the type of good-natured soul and character that he has when he's interacting with, say, Gale, etc., we realize that this is a character that is very sympathetic, and it is helped along so thoroughly by the charisma and style and acting craft of Al Pacino. This is a performance that is so grand and audacious and brilliant and cool. You know, Al Pacino, he has this way about looking so cool and giving off this really charismatic aura, and that is certainly the case with his performance here in Carlito's Way. I mean, he is so cool. He looks the part, and what's great too is he has this grounded center to him. I mean, he is a character that is trying to, quote unquote, do the right thing. He is trying to retire. He's trying to make good on his word. And so there is, in that way too, he is so sympathetic while being so ultra cool, while being the stylish persona that is embodied by the very presence of Al Pacino. So this is, I think, really, really fascinating stuff indeed. And to see him interact with these great performers, I mentioned too some of the key roles or the key relationships. For example, that with the character of Gale, the Penelope Ann Miller character, who has her own set of say, dreams and hopes, and also realities that she has to deal with, and also what she represents to him, and also what he represents to her, and the life that is promised or can be part of the dream. As I say, this idea of trying to achieve a sense of quote unquote paradise, and that is a life with Gale and everything that that means to Carlito, and also everything that that could potentially mean to her as well. So this is a really, this is one of the ways in which this film has an emotional, intimate core to it, that between the relationship between these two characters is really important. Now, there are other relationships that spin the film into, say, different directions. One of those critical relationships is that between the Al Pacino character and the Sean Penn character. Kleinfeld, the lawyer, who has his own set of background details, and when they are unearthed, when they're revealed, my goodness, stand back, because they are leading to some really explosive or potentially explosive fireworks indeed. And when Carlito, the main character, is caught in those explosive fireworks, we have to see how he is able, if at all, to escape those really dangerous and scary situations. And so this is also a very critical relationship, because it's also based on a fundamental sense of trust and loyalty and friendship, and how far that can go, or how far Carlito is willing to test that, despite the fact that they seem to be going in opposite directions. And so this is also a wonderful source of tension and a wonderful source of further revelation of the characters at hand. And then we also have the great stylings, the great camera work, the great Brian De Palma look and feel. This has the way in which the camera travels through the space, the way it tilts to suggest or signify a type of danger or menace, or the way it hypnotically glides through the space, the way it captures the neon and the light and the nightclubs and the euphoria, or the overly maybe drug-induced intensive highs of the crowd, and how Carlito is almost like a moral center, or maybe a type of eye of the hurricane situation. He is perhaps the most stable in this world that is revealing itself to be very unstable, very chaotic, very filled with mayhem and danger and menace. And that menace and danger and mayhem, I think, is exemplified so poetically through the way in which the camera moves and shines and glides and disrupts and unearths and creates chaos as well as creates beauty at the same time. This is the Brian De Palma touch. This is a Brian De Palma film through and through, and he is capturing that while giving us a real high-dose sense of tension and suspense. I mean, the way that he sets up scenarios, the tension builds and builds and builds, and elements add onto elements, within a particular scene that create even more senses of tension. And when they explode in a certain way, clashes or collisions, they lead to different scenarios or circumstances that lead to different scenarios or circumstances, and things build upon each other, build upon each other, build upon each other. So this is an action-packed film, filled with tension and suspense, guided on by the beautiful camera work in the hands of the direction of Brian De Palma and company, and fueled by the great performances by everyone concerned, including, of course, Al Pacino, to see his interactions and trying to deal with these situations while trying also to be cool and collected and calm while everything around him seems to be going to chaos and to hell. This is one of the great strengths of this film. This is one of the ways in which we are drawn into the film, and this is one of the reasons why this film, Carlito's Way, is so brilliant the way it is, so fascinating, so entertaining. And also, it could be said to be a type of, say, counter to other works of, say, the gangster genre that we might, that from Brian De Palma, which we might talk about later in the 31 days. So let's hold off on maybe a discussion of certain other films. They might come up later. But in the meantime, yes, Carlito's Way. I should mention, too, that there is also the 2005 prequel. It's described as being a prequel, which is a work which is directed by Michael Bregman and produced also by Martin Bregman, and it stars Jay Hernandez, Mario Van Peebles, and Luis Guzman, and Sean Combs and others. And this is the work which is, let me put it here, this is the DVD. This is Carlito's Way, Rise to Power. And so if you, both films are purportedly based on the works of Edwin Torres. So we have the prequel, or the earlier life events of certain plot elements of this character of Carlito, played now by Jay Hernandez, and his relationships with his partners and his friends, for example, the Mario Van Peebles character, and how they are have to deal with crime elements, the rise of the drug empire, their relationship with, say, the criminal underworld, as exemplified by the relationship with the character portrayed by Burt Young and the like. And so, and also their dealings with the police, potential police corruption on the other side of the law, etc. So how I said before about how maybe Carlito's Way, there's room for discussion as to whether this can be considered a part of the gangster film or the crime film, because of the fact that the character of Carlito, as portrayed by Al Pacino in this 93 work, might be said to be, there might be room for a discussion as to whether or not he can be considered a criminal at the time we meet him in Carlito's Way. Well, when we talk about the prequel, the 2005 prequel, Carlito's Way, Rise to Power, I think This is very much a story about the crime aspect of Carlito's life at this point in his life, and his rise to power, his rise from his humble beginnings to the place where he finds himself in the context of organized crime and drugs and money and power and influence, and also danger and risk to his very life and person, also that of his loved ones as well. There are some interesting family dynamic aspects, also family dynamic aspects with the Mary Van Peebles character, as we shall see. But that's to say that this is very much a crime film, or an organized crime film, or gangster film. But it forms an interesting counterpart, I think, to Carlito's Way. There are similarities. I think also one can see Carlito's Way: Rise to Power as its own film. It is also described as maybe a type of direct-to-video or direct-to-DVD film in that way. So maybe one might consider the quality of this film to be somewhat different than say the perceived quality of a film like the Brian De Palma or Carlito's Way. So you don't have to watch both films in order to, in other words, you can watch Carlito's Way: Rise to Power, not necessarily need to watch Carlito's Way, and then vice versa. You can watch Carlito's Way and not necessarily need to follow up with the prequel, Carlito's Way: Rise to Power. You can if you want to, because they do form an interesting link, but at the same time, I think one can consider them standalone from each other. There are similarities, but there are also, I think, ways in which they can be considered unique and independent works in and of itself. So, but again, in case you're interested. But now turning back to Carlito's Way for just for purposes of completing the discussion. This is a mesmerizing work. I can remember when this was released. I wasn't able to see it in the theater because it was in the early 90s and I didn't have a chance to go to the theater. But when it was on VHS tape rental and I saw it, I was just blown away by it. I thought it was so cool. It had this sense of tragedy and pathos. It has this interesting way in which it treats time and the chronology. We see events, very startling events that open the film for the purposes of the opening credits, and then we see how we go back in time and we see how events unfurl leading up to what we have seen, or maybe there's some connection or lack of connection. Again, we have to watch the film to find out, but there's this really fascinating way in which time and space are played around with, and again, that also lends itself to the sense of the stylistic underpinnings of euphoria and disorientation that I think are very much purposely part of the Brian De Palma cinematic palette and styling that we see part of, a very integral part of the cinematic expression known as Carlito's Way. So this was such an exciting and vital VHS rental for me, in the 90s, and it continues for me to be, or continues for me to be a really, really crucial work, not just in the filmography of Brian De Palma, not just in the filmography of Al Pacino, but again, in the context of discussion of the crime film, or for purposes of the 31 Days, the gangster film from 1970 to the present. This is the work described from 93, which is Carlito's Way. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.